Welcome back to the system for our closeout for our first week in September. Here we are on the or near the end of Total Solar Day on the 8th of September. And well, this is a bit of a landmark. This is the first day in months that we've actually turned off the air conditioning system. I did that as a bit of an experiment, see how much the temperature would rise. Up until this point, every day has gotten to the point where the AC system has kicked on. And today I've been monitoring the interior temperature of the house, and so far it looks like this is going to be what we'll use as our benchmark, just like we did when we had to turn the AC system on. And so we're going to go ahead and review this week as the temperatures are now changing from the furnace that was August and now into that transitional period of September, October, and then into November, where we start to look at the shoulder period. So no longer are we focused on thermal management, but now we're going back into that mode of being able to use the capacity of the batteries to try and extend the length of time that we can then press into that shoulder period. And probably for the next month or so, we'll be charging the car, trying to run it on sunlight. But we're also going to start looking very closely at the weather reports to see when our cloudy days are coming into play. And then we may wind up bringing the driving on sunlight portion of the year to a close sometime in late September, early October. And we'll see how that goes. But for now, let's head back over to the studio and we'll take a closer look at this first week in September. Welcome back to the studio and our recap for our first week in September. We open seeing a rapid change in temperatures from what we saw in July and August, obviously. We even got some rain that was predicted in the extended forecast. So let's get started and see how our first week in September turned out. So, starting with the first, we have a pretty typical cool day, and then if you'll remember the closeout in August that we did, we were still having some problems predicting the AC usage for the day. And it's simply not as easy to predict how much the AC will run as opposed to how much sun is going to be getting compared to any amount of cloud cover that's in the forecast. And so power production is an easy enough thing to predict, but then the overall result relies only on what you have left at Total Solar Day and at first contribution. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to predict. And as you see here, we wound up drawing a small amount of power from the grid due to overshooting our estimate for the previous day about how much AC use there was going to be. But we had good production, ending the day with a 28% system charge. And the notes, basically what we said, we started the day at 0% system charge, nothing to the vehicle today as we were having some company tomorrow, a friend of mine coming by, and so I wanted to make sure that I had enough system charge to be able to put sunlight in his car. And so here we have the second. And like I said, I had a house guest, so we had good production, 50 kilowatt hours, and balanced the home usage to match that, as you can see. I did make one mistake though, as you can see here, after putting his car on charge, I wound up getting distracted and wound up putting 4 kilowatt hours to the grid, because what happened was I started his charge too early in the morning and solar couldn't keep up. I figured solar was going to keep up it didn't, and his car wound up charging a lot faster than I had thought, and so it couldn't keep up with the solar contribution, and so we pulled a little bit from the grid. Then after my friend departed, I had to do some out-of-town driving, and then it was just more convenient for me to supercharge than to wait for the system. And so then the driving today was on sunlight to reach my destination, but then the next 4 or 5 days reflect the driving that was done on the supercharger session that I did. And the notes, like I said, oops, wound up grabbing a little bit from the grid. Supercharging was just shy of 200 miles of charge, and that was done to allow the system to recover a little bit. And so then we can bring up the third. So we had good production, a little over 50 kilowatt hours there, home usage coming down to that manageable 30 kilowatt hour point. And then due to a slight miscalculation of how much power to leave for the evening, I wound up drawing a small amount from the grid again. I thought that leaving 28% would be enough, but it was not. And so then the notes, like I said, I thought that leaving that 28% would be enough, and fell just short. But nothing put to the car today. We're still driving on the stored supercharger miles. And so then the fourth, starting the day at 18%, that gives you an idea of how much freeboard we could expect with the cooler weather, and slightly reduced production. That was due to some light rain, but overall we had good production, just above our about 10 kilowatts or so above our usage of 35.2 kilowatts, so that was good. Let you look at that for a second. And the notes, as stated, we didn't have much rainfall at all, but we did have some, and it was worth recording. So basically slightly less cloud cover than our exact prediction was. Our area was predicted to have 17%, and I think we got a little less than that. And then on the 5th, slightly more rain today, but still very light, as you can tell by the daily production of 49.5 kilowatt hours. And again, that's basically like we'd seen many times before, where you wind up with the rain occurring either before or after the peak production period, and then that leaves the day relatively unaffected. And the notes, no real pertinent data today, just the mileage. And the 6th, again starting the day at 45%, so with no vehicle charging today because we're still running on those supercharger miles, we were able to, with 50 kilowatts of production, we ended the day at 85%. And so then we had a trip planned for the following day, and so here's the notes. So what I did was I wound up grinding that down with a charge late in the day. Wound up putting 18 kilowatts to the kilowatt hours to the car, and then that would allow us to set up for the following day, where we could then bring the car up to full and head out. And so then here is the 7th. So now the interesting thing here is that obviously you see there that the total solar day percentage is listed there at 41%. So just prior to total solar day, later in the afternoon, we had actually peaked in the 80s. And so then I drew the power down to that, actually I drew it down to about 38%. The 41 reflects that the system had recovered a little bit of charge after I had charged up the car. But what you'll notice here is that I put 34 kilowatt hours to the vehicle. That is actually 100 miles. That is because I actually cut the power off to the vehicle because I had to leave. And so that brings up an interesting thing too, is that it's not always how much charge you can put in the vehicle. Maybe you'll have plenty of charge left in the system. Sometimes that's the bane of electric vehicles. Sometimes you just run out of time. And so had we had a bit more freeboard in the system, it would have been nice to have kept the car at a higher state of charge. But the system was what it was. It was very difficult with the thermal management to try and keep the vehicle charged to that percent as well as keeping the home going. So it was what it was. And the notes. And so basically that, like I said, 34 kilowatt hours to the car. And that was to be able to make that round trip to the Bay Area. Late afternoon, charge dropped the system from 81 to a little under 40%. And then there was a bit of recovery. So look at that for a second. And then on the 8th, another day with very cool conditions, good production with highly reduced home power usage. What you'll notice on this is I've actually removed the AC icon. I actually turned the AC off for the first time in a couple of months. And the home power draw reflects that at 26.4 kilowatt hours prior to putting that 34 kilowatt hours back into the vehicle after returning from the trip. And so the notes, as you can see there, the return trip was a little bit of a nail biter. That was cutting it close. I actually wound up, it was showing like -2% when I was setting out, but that sometimes happens as you start to drive. The heat builds up and temperature builds up in the battery, and then the vehicle starts showing a little bit longer range than when you had started off with. And so I made it back as kind of by the skin of my teeth, which was fun, and then immediately put that 34 kilowatt hours back into the vehicle to make sure that the car didn't sit there with a extreme low state of charge. And that's about it. Brings us to a close of our first week in September, and it's looking like a busy week to come. I've got quite a few things that I've got in the pipeline to try and bring out to you guys, so looking forward to quite a few of those subjects. And as always, best of luck with your own systems. If this is something that interests you, please feel free to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.